So Dave, Dave, I've got to stop getting into Twitter conversations. I've got to stop myself. I've done so good for so long, and this past week I just blew it and I fell down the rabbit hole.
Well, now, do you mean conversations or arguments?
Arguments.
Oh.
Conversations are one thing, but I've got to stop engaging when somebody disagrees with me. I've got to be able. I did so good for so long, and then I just snapped. I made a comment on Twitter where basically my point was that if you use an ampersand in a word balloon, you know that character that kind of looks like a figure eight.
Sure.
If you use an ampersand in a word balloon, you better have a good reason, like the name of a company or a gun to your head. And because I'd seen it somewhere, and I'm like, you lazy sot. All you ran out of room. You figured instead of writing out and, you'd use an ampersand. And it's one thing if it's a company name like, Doodles and Malloy Incorporated.
I want to know what Doodles and Malloy make. What does Doodles and Malloy do?
That's my favorite bookstore.
That just came top of mind. I don't know. I should look it up. Maybe it exists.
Doodles and Malloy sounds like a kid show where Doodles is a cartoon character that comes to life, and Malloy is just a hard-drinking Irishman that cusses at Doodles all day.
See, I had it just the opposite. I had Malloy was like the long-suffering female foil for Doodles, who's always getting into trouble, and she looks at him and says, Doodles. But I got into this I put that out there because I'm like, really, we shouldn't use an ampersand because it's expedient. It breaks up the flow of the type, and it's just, it's a stumbling block over reading. And I'm really, really obsessed over trying to make my stuff as readable as possible. I don't know how successful I am, but I'm obsessed over it. And a couple people kind of says, well, sometimes you can do this, sometimes you can do that. And I was, Mr. Hey, everybody do your thing. That's cool. But my aesthetic is my aesthetic and it doesn't have to be yours. And this one guy started really pushing back and saying, well, it's perfectly okay. And somehow this guy segued into using numbers. And of course, as you heard on this show, I hate using numbers in a word balloon because a number like 15 can look like a word like is. And so I'm hard line and that was a bridge too far. And I'm like, nah, you know what? You really shouldn't use a number in a word balloon. You really, really shouldn't. All of that, even-handed talk about my personal aesthetic went right out the window. And then, boom, right down the rabbit hole I go with this guy. And he's like, oh, no, that's okay. And I'm like, no, it's really not. And because it reads like a word. And he says, well, no, it doesn't. And I pulled him up one of those things. You can find it if you Google it. But it's an entire paragraph written with letters and numbers, and you read it perfectly clearly. You read the whole thing, and half of it's numbers, but your brain translates it.
We used to call that leet speak in the early aughts.
Yeah,
Remember?
leet speak, exactly. So here I am, and I'm like, boom, there you go. And I'm like, well, there you go, Brad. Took care of that guy. And he comes back and he, well, I submit that it's if you've got a problem like that, it's your font, not the fact that you're using numbers. And I'm like, no, I submit, you're wrong. And I start getting
the big problem in that
forth.
argument is that he led with I submit.
Oh, well, boy, oh, boy.
What is he, an 18th century barrister in England? My lord, I submit that the juror should be removed from the courtroom.
You want to see my face turn blue? You either start a tweet to me with I submit or just FYI. Somehow just FYI gets under my skin like nobody's business. But I go down the rabbit hole with and we're going back and forth, and I'm like, I'm spending too much time on this fucking throwaway tweet. So I go over and I look at this person's comic, and oh my God, it's illegible. His lettering is absolutely illegible, and my jaw drops. And I'm like, oh my God, I've been having a discussion about the aesthetics of lettering with somebody who can't do the basics of This was beyond. I mean, I've seen some bad lettering. This was beyond bad lettering. It was really, really illegible.
Brad has discovered the nature of the internet.
But there was nothing stopping him him from sharing his opinion on on this Twitter thread. Nothing stopping him at all. But I went to read it because I'm like, okay, well, maybe there's something about what he's doing that I can learn from. Holy moly.
Yeah,
Now,
maybe I need to open my mind. Maybe this person will teach me a little. Nope. Bail out.
What I learned is don't engage with people. I'm telling you, one-way communication. I did that on my blog years ago. It's the smartest thing I ever did. Turned off comments. One way. If it's a pleasant conversation, that's fine on Twitter. But man, I got to remind myself, Dave, one-way conversations.
Well, I know that we have not yet technically started the show, but this actually raises a question. If you only respond to compliments on Twitter, does that look weird when you go radio silent when someone has a criticism?
I don't care what it looks like. You're assuming somebody's looking. There's the problem. The only way somebody's going to look is if I engage it and give it that amplification. If somebody says something that I don't agree with and I ignore it, it settles to the bottom of the tank quicker than anybody can see. But if I start engaging back and forth, now that Twitter's getting engagement and it's being propagated more, I'm adding to the problem.
Yeah, I guess you're right. Well, what's funny is when you were telling that story, by the way, I thought you were going to say, so I went to his site. Turns out his name is John Ampersand. He's the son of the guy that invented ampersand. Sir, when my father in 1910 invented the ampersand, I'll have you know he worked his ass off to get that onto every standard American keyboard.
Oh, there's actually a story. I'm not going to do it justice because I haven't reviewed it, and I'll get the details wrong. But go and look up the etymology of an ampersand. It actually stands for and per se, and I think. But the way it came in, it actually stands for an et in Latin, et. But it's really interesting what the etymology is.
I will go look that up. But before I do that, I'm going to say hi, everybody, and welcome to Comic Lab, the show about etymology and making comics.
And etymology and making a living from comics. I'm Brad Guigar, editor of webcomics.com and cartoonist of Heberling.
And I'm his friend Dave Kellett, cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and co-director of Stripped.
And this week's Hour of Comics Advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/comiclab.
And Bradley J., who is that third delightful voice I hear in the background?
Oh, man, I am so excited about this because this is somebody that we wanted to have on the show for a long time. And it doesn't hurt that she's one of my favorite people in the whole entire world. We are joined today by the wonderful Alex Heberling.
Aw, you guys.
You can check out now. Listen, Alex has been doing this for an awful long time. So if you want to get into all things Alex, you got some reading ahead of you. But the best place to go is alexheberling.com, and that's ALEX, just like it sounds. Heberling is HEBERLING. And there you can jump to her wonderful comic called The Hues, Post-Apocalyptic Magical Girls, as well as some of her older projects like Alex's Guide to a Well-Lived Life, Garanos, The Shepherd, Corner on Main, tons of good stuff. And I'm telling you, tons of really solid art, compelling writing. You're going to really enjoy this. And if you haven't gotten enough yet, she also is the colorist of Heberling. So she makes me look good every week.
And Alex, where are you hailing from today? I always like to know physically where somebody is geographically.
At the moment, I'm in Toledo, Ohio.
Toledo, Ohio.
Yep,
home
that's
of,
where I'm from.
What's his name from MASH? What's his name?
Jamie
I'm
Farr.
blanking.
Jamie Farr, Klinger.
There we go. Wow.
Yep. We love our Jamie Farr.
Isn't that amazing that 40 years on, people are still like, Klinger.
That's like one of Toledo's 5 claims to fame. So we milk that for all it's worth.
The other 2 is a pig fat rendering plant, a paper mill, and what are the other 2? I forget.
Glass and Tony Pacos.
What was the name of the minor league team that?
The Mud
Oh,
Hens.
the Mud Hens. Yeah.
Toledo Mud Hens.
I joke about the pig fat rendering because when I lived in South Bend, there was a paper rendering plant down the street, and when the wind shifted and that thing blew towards South Bend, good God, it smelled like the apocalypse was upon you.
Yeah, there was a cardboard manufacturing place down in Conshohocken, Ohio, where Carolyn got
Conshohocken? That's an amazing name. That's really pretty in a way.
It was Carolyn got a job interview down there.
That sounds like it's around Akron, Cleveland.
And we're going down there for a job interview, and she gets out of the job interview, comes out to the car, and immediately hurls in the parking lot because the smell was so bad. It just, like you said, the wind shifted and it came downwind from the factory, and it was a foul smell.
Yeah, I guess the kids at home are like, Dad's home from the plant. He hasn't pulled up from the driveway yet. He'll be here in a second. I can smell him coming.
Now, listen, Alex, I've mentioned that among your many skills, you are a fantastic and deft colorist. And the thing I got to kind of tell you about is you're going to have to take it easy when you're talking about color. Because Dave over there is colorblind, so you got to keep your words really simple if you're going to talk about color.
Keep your words simple.
Yeah, you got to you like explain it like you're like to a 5-year-old. Like just use like red, green. If you start saying chartreuse and mauve, he's gonna overheat.
Oh, wait till we start talking about musicals.
I like though the idea that like Alex, his English no good. Use small words. He colorblind.
He not understand wavelength.
Me simple caveman from past. Me no understand Photoshop color picker. It is true though, Brad. You know, I was going to be like aggrieved when you first said you've got to be careful in your word choice, but you did say chartreuse, and I actually have no idea what chartreuse is.
It's a shade of yellow green.
Yep, that's what I was going to say. Shade of yellow green. So yes. So let me ask you this, because when did you first find that you had the bug for cartooning? It's fun to start there. Was it grade school? Was it high school?
Oh gosh, probably like junior high school.
And was it like comics for you and your friends, or were you secretly hiding them away and didn't tell anybody?
It was anime.
Oh, it was anime.
Really?
Yes, it was Sailor Moon, to be specific.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I can totally see that influence in your work.
Back in 98, that started airing on Cartoon Network, and that was when I started junior high.
If you could travel back in time to the first time you saw Sailor Moon, did your eyes get really, really wide when you first saw that intro and you're like, what is this? I want to watch this.
Actually, I didn't see it until the first commercial break because I was watching Pop-Up Video on VH1.
Oh, really?
Yes. Remember that, Joe?
Wow, all three of us just aged ourselves right there. That was great.
I remember it well.
It was on a commercial, and so I flipped over to Cartoon Network to see what was on, and it was Sailor Moon. I'm like, what's this? Ooh, it's like girl Power Rangers. There's more than one girl. It's amazing. Oh my God, and space shit. It's like a trap was set just for me.
So essentially then you got your start, and this is probably true with all three of us now that I'm saying this out loud, with fan art then, yeah? With fan stories about pre-existing titles?
Oh yeah, definitely.
And then when did you make the transition to starting creating comics on your own?
On my own?
Not on your own, you know what I mean? Like your own stories that you own.
Right. Well, the Hughes is a lot older than the current comic incarnation is. And I actually initially created the Hughes back in junior high. So I've got I've known these characters for basically 20 years.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. And for a long time, I didn't know if I was going to do anything with it. And then about 5 years ago, I was like, screw it. I'm going to do it. It's going to be fun.
Well, fantastic. Well, listen, Alex, since you're here, we've got a few questions from our $5 Patreon backers. And since you've got a deep, deep history in webcomics, we'd like to hear your encouragement along with ours on some of these questions. What do you think?
Okay.
All right. I said encouragement because the first question is about discouragement.
The first question will make us want to put our head into a mud bucket.
Yes, exactly. Here's the question. What helps you most to deal with discouragement? Specifically, the feeling that people don't really care about what you're creating. I realize that creating and getting good at webcomics is a long game, and I'm willing to put in the time and effort it requires. See, these question askers, they know what we're going to say, so they try to circumvent us. I know what you're going to say. It's a marathon, not a sprint, but really, I want you to answer my question. But he goes on to say, but sometimes it's just a little hard to pour so much of myself into a project and then get nothing back but the sound of crickets. Any tips for staying motivated while I'm working on something and gradually getting better? And I ask you, Alex Heberling, what would you say to this cartoonist?
I'm going to say that silence might last a lot longer than you might think. So you need to get like support and encouragement from like your peers.
Oh, that's a great point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I've still got a relatively small following. I've got like maybe a dozen or so like regular people that interact with me, but for the most part, the rest of my audience doesn't engage very much. That could be for many reasons, but whatever. So yeah, you can't always depend on the adulation of the masses to get you through those tough times.
And for you, the support in your personal life, either peer group or family or friends, what does that mean to you? Do you run them by them before they go public, or do you check in every couple of months or couple of weeks and say like, "Hey, how's it going?" Or what does it mean to you to have that peer group or family support?
Usually just kind of checking in every few months. I've been doing this so long that the silence doesn't bother me.
Right. Yeah, I think silence is a great way to describe what you'll feel in those growing years, and sometimes even in the established years, where because it's like having done some stand-up comedy and some improv. It's interesting how you can literally read a room. You know when you're failing because it goes silent, or there's awkward coughs, or that kind of thing. And you know
Hmm.
when you're hitting because you're getting a laugh, or people are leaning forward, or it gets a different kind of silence where people are hushing their breathing, because they're listening so closely. And the problem with working
Yeah.
online is you get none of those interpersonal human to human signals that lets you know I'm
Yes,
listening. I'm
yes.
quiet, but I am listening. And you
Yeah.
just have to have certain truth, a certain faith that that even in those silent moments, people are reading, they are taking it in, and your audience hopefully is growing. Brad, what do you think?
Well, there's a couple of things that's worth talking about there, but the first one is just verifying what you two have said. So we look at some people that have a certain type of audience that's very vociferous and very actively engaged, and we tend to measure ourselves against them. And I'll second what Alex said. My audience has always been there. They've always been somewhat supportive, depending on what I was putting out. But my audience has never been particularly loud. They've never been particularly engaged to the point where like they wanted to discuss the comic on my blog or on social media or something like that. They really were never interested in that so much. But when a book came out, when it was time to kickstart the book, they were there. And so I think sometimes I would say not to get too upset if you're not getting that kind of response, because it might just be that you've got a quiet audience, but an audience
Right.
nonetheless. Now, the second point is, of course, if you're getting 0 page views and you've got very little traction on social media, that's telling you that it's not a quiet audience. It's a non-existent audience, and that's a bigger problem. That's telling you that what you're doing just isn't hitting, and then you've got another decision to make whether you and I'm telling you, there are two perfectly valid choices. One is I'm going to keep working at this and getting better, and the other is maybe I'm going to try something else and see what the reaction is to that. It doesn't mean that you've been defeated. It means that you'll take whatever you learned doing comics into the next thing that you do and apply it. And that was a worthwhile
Right.
exercise. So I hate to see people banging their head against the wall when it's like, nah, you know what? This isn't the thing for you. You should take this, what you learned, onto something else. But I can't tell you that. You've got to come to that conclusion whether this is something you want to stick with or whether it's something you want to apply to the next thing.
Right. Well, I guess the looking at it from bird's eye view too, we should also just acknowledge that all three of us, and frankly, every cartoonist that I know, has at some point felt discouragement. So you are not alone in this feeling.
Mhm.
Um, it's not unique to you or even to your level of success or growing. I have had moments in my career where everything seemingly seems like if an outsider were to come in, they'd be like, wow, everything's hitting for Dave. And yet I still oddly feel discouragement. And sometimes that's just because as a cartoonist, you only feel as good as your last cartoon. And so if you had a
Yeah.
cartoon that blew up 2 weeks ago on Reddit and all your friends were like, wow, that one was amazing. And all your readers are like, wow, that's amazing. And it brought in a bunch of new people. But the one that you produced yesterday or the one that's currently on your drawing table isn't firing for you, then you kind of only feel as good as that comic. And so that can, you even in success is what I'm saying is that you can feel moments of like, oh, this isn't working and no one cares and I'm fooling myself and all that sort of stuff. So that can happen no matter where you are. But as far as feeling encouragement, one of the things that Brad always touchstones on is that if the joy is there, um, in a way, it doesn't matter. And here's what I mean by that. If you are still enjoying the act of cartooning and you continue to produce, then you just by nature of doing it, you are going to be getting better and better. But if you're feeling discouraged and the act of cartooning no longer brings you joy, then to Brad's point, maybe it's time to find a different venue, a different path, a different journey for you artistically. But if you're feeling discouragement, but the art of cartooning is still bringing you joy, I think there's a lot of hope there. Wouldn't you both say?
No, I think so.
I mean, that's the basic reason why we became cartoonists is that the act of drawing and telling these stories brings us joy. So if you still have that, then you're still on the journey towards becoming the cartoonist you want to be and towards the cartoonist your readers would like you to be.
Oh gosh, you're so right. And not only that, what something you said just resonated with me, Dave, is and that is you're only as good as your last comic or your last update. So often, I'm telling you, so often I've posted something that I thought was brilliant, that I just loved for any number of reasons. Maybe the expression on somebody's face came out extra
Right.
good, or there was a little bit of wordplay there that I really thought just hung just right. And I will post it, and I'll get an immediate response. And in that moment, I fall for it every time. Every time I'm like, oh, they know that I'm as great as I am. And every time it's pointing out a freaking typographical error or a misspelling. Every last time it's a misspelling. I
try to point those out when I catch them.
I love you. I say this with no bit of like shade. I love you when you do that. I really, because I'd rather that than
It goes up and then 20 minutes later.
Yeah. And well, number one, I also appreciate it when one of my Patreon backers points it out. Don't get me wrong, but the disappointment I feel in myself is always just crushing because it's of my many faults. It's definitely one of the biggest. I can spell. My fingers just don't hit the right buttons. That's just what I do. I'm constantly hitting the wrong buttons.
Officer, the problem was not me; it was my fingers. So let me ask you about the last. I want to focus on this last part of this question because I think this is the most helpful thing we can give to this questioner. And I will direct it towards Alex first. So, Alex, the last part of the question is: any tips for staying motivated while I'm working on gradually getting better? How do you keep motivated? How do you stay motivated? How do you look for motivation?
Spite.
Oh no, that's a good one.
I don't know. I just kind of like, I am going to do this and I'm going to make it work. And that's just kind of the philosophy I've had for 13 years.
Yeah, that could absolutely power you through it. Absolutely. Brad, how about you?
Oh, I've got it. Well, just recently, see, my younger son and I always had a Friday tradition. If we made it through the week, getting to school on time, Friday we'd stop at Dunkin' Donuts and treat ourselves to donuts for breakfast, and which I looked forward to as much as he
I was going
did.
to say,
Well,
that sounds like a trip for Dad. That's what that sounds like.
That's exactly right. Well, now he's going to a different school, and because of logistics and everything else, it's just not easy for us to do it anymore. It used to be right on our way. And he was kind of waxing nostalgic. Oh, I really miss our going to Dunkin' Donuts together. And I said, well, listen, you could, except you're going to have to get up earlier in the morning because we have to do this, that, and the next. And then we could do it, but you'd have to get up early. And I said, frankly, it's been so hard getting you out of bed lately that it's never going to happen. You might as well just forget about it because you're impossible to get out of bed. And next morning was Friday morning, and he wakes up. I wake up, stumble out to the bathroom. He's out in the hallway, fully dressed, and he says, "Oh, good morning." I said, "How long have you been up?" He said, 5:30. It was 7:00 in the morning. He had been up for an hour and a half. But my wife comes out and she says, "He's your son. He's motivated by spite." Yeah, that's you know what? I'm going to double down on what Alex said. Without a doubt, it is okay to be a little bit motivated by, they said I couldn't do it, and by God, I'm going to do this thing. I am not against that. I would hope that it's not the only reason you do something, but it's okay to kind of let that motivate you a little bit. That's perfectly fine. And the other thing is, frankly, your motivation has to come, whether it's spite or whether it's pride in one's work or whether this is just a scratch I need to itch or this makes me feel happy. Your motivation has to come from within. And I can't tell you how to be motivated. I can't. It's impossible. I can't tell you how to be motivated any more than I can tell you how to be happy or how to be angry. I can't tell you how to be any emotion or anything that happens.
You can tell me, Brad. You can tell me how to be angry.
I can't tell you. I can tell you something that'll make you angry.
Whoa, hey.
We've been doing this long enough. I know just which buttons to push.
You know, all you need to do is start complimenting me, and then I
That's right. No, but I can't tell you how to be happy, and I can't tell you how to be motivated. That's got to come from within. Do you think, Dave?
Well, no, yes, I do agree with you broadly, but I will say specifically one way that I find to get
it's Bradley.
What's that?
It's Bradley.
It's Bradley. Well, Bradley. Well,
you said broadly. It's Bradley.
You jerk. Anyway, the one thing I would say is that sometimes it's best to go back to your roots, and what I mean by that is, if Alex is feeling like she's down this week, and maybe, honest to God, maybe watching an episode or two or Sailor Moon will get it back. Or for me, if I'm feeling unmotivated and that I don't want to be a cartoonist, going back to the cartoonist that I read as a kid or as a young adult that fired me up about cartooning and what you could do with it and how fun it was, rereading that sometimes gets me motivated again. So I think that's a good trigger that can sometimes help. And then, frankly, a goal list. We've talked about this before, Brad, but I have a 5-year, a 2-year, and a 6-month goal list, and it's nice to revisit that because it's kind of like when you put together a health plan. You're like, I'm going to go to the gym, and then for 30 days you go, and then the 30th day you don't go. You're mad at yourself a little bit for that 30th day, and or cartooning goals. You're mad at yourself if you don't make them, and so sometimes personal accountability can also help me stay motivated. But yes, I agree with you that whatever techniques I come up with might not translate to this questioner. So I can see both sides of answering how to stay motivated there, basically. Alex, what aside from spite, there's got to be some positive way. How do you keep yourself motivated in a positive way?
Well, with my comic, I try to think of the girls like me who found some piece of media that really resonated with them and made them feel like they're seen.
Right, yeah.
Like Sailor Moon did for me. So I suppose those hypothetical girls and other kids are kind of my motivation. I want to make something for them.
Oh, that's a cool idea. The idea of like you're imagining the readers that are looking at your comic.
And if I can make something that resonates with someone that strongly, that would be amazing.
That's great.
Yeah, what a great thought.
And then the one thing, Brad, I forgot, I wanted to come back on this, but you were talking about having a quiet audience, and Alex, you were saying too, having a quiet audience. If I could split myself into 2 different cartoonists, and one Dave was doing Sheldon and David was doing Drive, I think Dave would be jealous about how talkative drive readers are.
Mm-hmm.
And David would think, what's wrong with Dave? Boy, it's getting complicated. Never mind. The drive cartoonist would think, like, what's wrong with the Sheldon readers that they aren't as talkative? Because it's weird, but one of my audiences is really chatty and pings me all the time with feedback and encouragement. And Sheldon, for the most part, is pretty quiet. So
Interesting.
some strips, just by nature
Wow.
of what they are, they just don't get as much feedback. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just the nature of the comic, you know?
And also, I think maybe the nature of the author a little bit, because I tend to be a little more reserved. I kind of hang back a little bit. So me being a quiet person probably attracts sort of a similar vibe to me because the readers can like get that vibe from me. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wouldn't disagree with that a bit.
Yeah. I think that's absolutely true. Like in some respects, you get back. We've said this before, Brad, on the show. You get back what you put out, and if what you put out is anger and spite, then a lot of your comments coming back are going to be anger and spite.
Or they just won't comment at all because they'll just leave. You know?
Right.
Yeah. They'll walk away.
Well, Brad, another thing that I want to talk about this week, and it wasn't specifically a reader question, but I think it's a fun topic for three working cartoonists, and it kind of goes along with discouragement, frankly, but it's about burnout and how, separate from how other people are reacting or not reacting to your cartoonist, it's basically about your own internal motivations. And I would like to know how both of you react or deal with burnout. And since Alex is our kind guest today, why don't we lead with Alex? Alex, what is your mind frame around burnout? How do you deal with it? How does it hit you? How do you dread it or run from it, as Thanos would say? Anyway, you go ahead.
Well, I just went through it last year, so I have lots of fresh memories and coping mechanisms.
The battle scars are fresh, huh?
Yes, I'm still recovering, to be honest. So last year I broke up with my ex. I had a failed Kickstarter and I moved back in with my parents. So kind of a triple blow of like, ugh.
And all within a very short span of time, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
It was all within a few months.
Oh.
And so I didn't really take time to take care of my mental health during this too well. And so at the end of last summer of 2017, I burnt out. I had to take like 6 weeks off from doing stuff for Brad. I just couldn't do anything. It was terrible. And then I got some help. I got a new therapist. I got some medications and all that stuff. And over the last year, I've been working on that, and basically just came off of an 18-month hiatus. So I'm kind of trying to get my train back on the track in real time. Right. To kind of get back to where I was.
Well, first of all, good for you for taking care of it, because there are many of my relatives included would do fingers in the ear and la 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 la. And I've always been of the opinion that mental health, like if your foot is hurting, you treat your foot. And if you're if life or events or even natural serotonin levels in your brain need a little help, then get a little help. And there's zero stigma to that. And so
absolutely.
Just as a culture, because we're still struggling with that, I think that just needs to be said. So good for you for taking care of it, and thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and I wouldn't have been able to do that without the support of my family, to be honest. So they were a big part of it.
Well, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. And so now that you're finding your footing again, is it kind of like, I don't know, is there an excitement to it, or is there a trepidation to it, or what do you feel as you start back in on things?
Well, it feels like it's not starting over, but it kind of feels like starting over, you know?
Right.
Taking, a year and a half off, didn't do me too well financially, for one. And so my readership definitely suffered.
And do you find that even your hand has to be retrained again with like, oh, I remember how I would do this trick or this Photoshop?
Not so much that.
Okay.
And in fact, I had some repetitive stress injuries that I've also been taking care of too with my drawing hand, although I'm probably going to need some PT on it, and I'll probably do that in December. So basically everything in my life has been screaming at me to slow down. So I'm slowing down.
That is good. That's good. That is a that is a great thing to listen to those signs when that happens. So that's good. You should be commended for that. And Brad, how do you deal with burnout? Where does it hit you? How do you react to it?
Well, yeah, that's a really good question because it's one of those things that can easily sneak up on you. I haven't had to grapple with a problem as serious as what Alex is talking about, but I will say that one of the things that really made a big difference for me in how I address this kind of stress in my life was admitting certain limitations and kind of stepping back from that very macho image that I presented in Webcomics Weekly, and maybe we as a group did, and again, it was a different time, and it was an advertising publishing stratus where you really had to go 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 go. You had to always publish another thing, and you had to build that archive up, and we were all about, get that update up, 5 days a week, 6 days a week, and you got to get another one up, the Brad from the past 5 years has been a lot more along the lines of, focus your efforts where they're most being rewarded, and that's Patreon. And there are some things that you're just gonna have to let go. There are some things that aren't gonna get done. And things like taking a couple of weeks off in the summer, where I just said, "Yeah, I'm gonna post a bunch of best of stuff and post some stuff that had previously been Patreon exclusive and use that just to kind of keep people tuned in, but not really worry so much about what's going to happen. And I'll be doing that in December as well. I'm going to take a couple weeks off in December and just enjoy the family. And I think you've got to give yourself the go ahead, give yourself the okay to do a little self-care from time to time, to say, okay, I need to take a step back.
Right.
The internet will still be there when you get back.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And it's going to be the same dumpster fire it was when you left.
Exactly.
But that's and also all of the relationships that you built are going to be there. When Alex got in touch with me and she said, "Listen, I need to step away for a little bit," I said, "I get it. That's fine. Let me know when you're ready to come back." And that's it.
That was the end of the conversation.
Yeah, I don't need to know more than that. I to the extent that unless you want to talk about it, but I'm not going to pressure you and say, well, there you got to give me this reason, that reason. No, forget about it. I get somebody who's saying I need to take a step away from this thing for a little bit. Right. That's great.
Right.
And in Alex's case, her work was so good. I was like, just let me know when you're ready to come back. That's all I need to know. And I was so thrilled when that day did come, because I value her work immensely. And a lot of if you are an Evil Ink, if you're an Evil Ink reader, you feel the same way. I know you do.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, and Brad, speaking onto that earlier phase in our life where we treated it, and you're right to use the phrase macho. There was almost something macho about it. Like, I can do anything. Who cares if I'm not getting sleep?
You don't need sleep.
Yeah. Who cares if I'm not taking care of my health? This thing needs to get done, and so by God, it's going to get done. And for me, the humbling point, the burnout came when I was a new dad, and my wife's career has kind of 6 months where things go fallow and she's very available and life is delightful. And then 6 months where literally I'm single dadding it, where I just don't see her. She's so busy. And so there came kind of a mental switch from, frankly, a boyhood Dave of like, I can do anything. I don't need to sleep. I don't need to eat. I don't need to go to the gym. I can just, I'm a machine of cartooning. To a person in their 30s who was more of, all I can do is all I can do, and that's okay. And
Yeah.
that sounds like it was an easy switch, but for me, it was really hard. And frankly, it took burnout where nothing was being created for me to go, well, at least try to do one this week while you're taking care of the kids, or at least try to do,
Yeah.
Yeah,
some. And then
exactly.
and it's a resetting of expectations, and frankly, being kinder to myself, because I had set such a goal since I was a kid of like, I'm gonna be a cartoonist, rah, 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 that once I started to get it, it was this unrelenting, uh, an unforgiving state where I wouldn't listen to what my body was telling me. I wouldn't listen to what my mind was telling me, that I needed to sleep or I needed to eat or I needed to be social, because by God, I was going to be a cartoonist.
Hmm.
And the counter argument is, well, then you got a cartooning career. Yeah, true. But it took basically a stage of burnout as a new dad, getting zero sleep on someone else's schedule who's tiny, and saying, okay, all I can do is all I can do, and that's okay. So that was
Yeah.
my burnout.
Yeah, I basically went through the same journey because the pace that I was working at before, before the breakup and the move and all that other stuff was not sustainable. And regardless of whether all that stuff happened or not, I was probably heading for burnout in any case.
Right, right. God, the phrase "not sustainable" is super true, Alex. Yeah, you're right. It's like,
Yeah.
when you're in it, you're like, "I can keep this going."
I was trying to do 3 full comic pages a week.
Oh,
Oof.
oh.
Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Monday, Wednesday,
What are
Friday.
you, a Marvel artist in the 70s? What's going on
Monday,
there?
Wednesday, Friday. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Brad. I need to be a webcomic artist.
Oh my God. Yeah. Yeah. Well, you know what I'm sitting here thinking, listening to the three of us, is that we might need part of this might be that what we are identifying as burnout just might. I mean, okay. Let me frame this correctly. Burnout might be a natural part of the creative process, in that you might get to that point naturally along the way, and that it can be a bad thing if like what you guys were talking about, you're pushing yourself too hard, you're pushing your stability too hard. But on the other hand, it might just be that we need to come up with a better word for burnout so that it's not a negative thing. You know what I'm trying to say here. We might need to accept that sometimes we need these periods of self-care and quiet, and that if we call it burnout, it's a failure.
Right.
Right? It's a negative thing. We might need to start thinking about this in a different way so that we don't push ourselves past self-care so far, and we say, okay, I'm in whatever that word is. I'm in this zone now. I need to take it easy for a little bit so you don't push it to the extent that it becomes a health crisis.
I think one helpful way to reframe it is that when we're all at our most hard charging point, when Alex was producing 3 full color pages a week, when I was doing Sheldon and Drive and Stripped and all the other projects that I was working on at the time, when Brad was doing a bunch of stuff, we thought of ourselves as a machine, like we're churning it out. That was sort of our mental framework. But
Mhm.
frankly, life is more like the seasons. And I know that sounds cheesy, but you can produce in spring and summer only because you had a quieter period in fall and winter where things kind of went fallow and recuperated,
Right.
And so a life is more like that. You have to have a season of growth. You have to have a season of rest. And it is not unnatural to say, no, I need to take a step back for a little bit, and basically refire up my engines again. And so, but I don't know what that word is yet, though. I'm trying to think as I speak of what a good metaphor that we could use instead of saying burnout.
I'm trying to think of what my therapist would say.
Like it's kind of like a fallow period, but even that sounds like it's unproducing, which is not what's happening. Like things are quiet on the
Yeah.
surface, but your mind is still working, your heart is still working, and your
Hibernation, maybe?
hibernate. Yeah, that's
What
good.
about that cocooning concept that you guys have
Oh,
talked
with
about?
butterflies. Yeah, but
Yeah.
that's good because what's going on with a butterfly is it's quiet on the surface, but there's a ton of stuff going on inside. And so
Mhm.
like even in a
Yeah.
period where you're reading a lot or watching a lot of media or talking with friends, you're firing back up those, or you're restocking those engines for when you do fire them back up again,
Let me talk about this just for a second, if you'd like to, Alex, because this is something that I don't think we talk about enough. And that is, you get to the point where you're like, okay, I think I need to talk to a professional. I think I need that. or I think this is something that would help. How do you find a good therapist? How do you go about, what's the nuts and bolts of just taking that step?
Well, well, for me, when I first went back to therapy about 2 years ago, um, I just I was like, okay, I don't care. I just need to go to a therapist. It doesn't matter who it is at this point.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
I basically just went down the list of nearby psychologists on my provider's website. And I would call and leave a message, and maybe they'd call me back and say they're not accepting new patients or this or that. And so I just went to the first guy who actually called me back to give me an appointment.
Oh, is that right?
Hey, that's the same way I pick a contractor. It works for me.
It worked out because we luckily did have a good rapport right from the beginning. I know that some people have to shop around for a good therapist that they like. So far it's worked for me.
That's great.
Yeah.
Of course, that therapist was down in Columbus where I used to live, and so I have a different therapist up here in Toledo.
And so when you moved to Toledo, did that process start again, or does the old therapist give you a referral to somebody? How does that work?
Well, basically, I had to start over. Up here, I went through a community mental health organization, and I got with a therapist that I was recommended to by another family friend.
Well, that's great though that in both places
Nice.
you were able to make it work. That's fantastic.
Yeah, and I couldn't have done any of this without the therapy.
Yeah, I think there's nothing wrong with that in the same way that like when I had problems with my kidney, it's not like I'm going to fix the kidney by myself, you know. You go to a doctor for
Right.
it. And so I know I keep coming back to other physical ailments, but I think it's weird that our society puts some odd stigma on it when there's nothing to be stigmatized about that. I think it's a totally natural and healthy thing to seek out the help of other humans when you're in a moment, you know?
hmm Well, I'll tell you what, we still got a little bit of time, you two, and we've got another very intriguing Patreon question. Would you like
Let's
to
do it.
tackle it?
Sure.
All right. So here's one, and it's similar to one we've got in the past, but it takes a little turn. So don't get thrown by there.
Takes a little turn. Dave and Brad, I've killed a man.
Plot twist. He was my grandfather.
I'm in a lot of trouble.
I'm currently setting up a weekly comic, and I'm trying to make about 10 pages before I post anything, so I have a reserve. Before I post the actual comic, I want to do a few teaser posters with things like coming soon on them. About how soon before I post the actual comic should I start posting these teasers? I ask you, Alex Heberling.
I don't know. I'd probably do like a week or two.
Mm-hmm.
Like make a tweet every day.
And where would you post them?
Stuff like that I would do on Twitter, like to get the hype up and stuff like that.
David, what do you think?
Yeah, I would agree that Twitter or Instagram, like little quick hits, would be a good one to do. But I'm going to take a little what's the word? Contrapositive? I don't know. I'm going to take a contrarian.
You're going to be a contrarian over
is
there?
Is contrapositive a word? Did I make that up, or is that a real word? I'm going to look that up later.
I think you made that up.
I think I made that up. Anyway, I'm gonna like take a slightly contrarian view, which is that the reason that movie and large budget media put out coming soon stuff is that there's a whole network and system of theaters and distribution that are in place that need you to hit that movie right away when it first comes out, or that TV show right away when it first comes out.
Yes.
And so coming soons are really important for that that system of media distribution. But comics, especially web comics, are different. And so I would actually argue that coming soon doesn't gain you anything because, to Brad's longstanding point, this is a marathon, not a sprint. And you don't need to hit or you don't need to be out of that gate at 1,000 miles an hour. You can be out of that gate at a trot, and that's totally fine. Because if you keep in mind that it's a marathon, not a sprint, you don't need to build anticipation for the first days or the first weeks of the comic. Frankly, you might even be wasting your time because it's the body of work, it's the comic itself that's going to gain you an audience, not a coming soon poster. Brad Guigar, what do you think of that contrarian or contrapositive opinion, if that's a real word?
I couldn't agree with you contrarily more. I think it's I'll go so far as I think it's a bad idea because think about the effect that this is going to have on social media. You're going to put up a Cummings, and this goes back to what we talked about just last week about somebody who said, "Oh, I hit fool's gold because I went on social media and I had 300,000 page views, but no traffic to my site." And then we come to find out that he didn't have a hyperlink back to his site. He was expecting people to type in manually the URL. This is the same exact thing. In that, let's say number one, you actually succeed in coming up with a really good coming soon image that is compelling instead of confusing and really makes me want to read this thing. Your best case scenario is I want to read this thing and I'm thwarted because it's not there yet. And I'm disappointed in the moment. That's your best case scenario. Your worst case scenario is I click over and there's nothing there and I'm confused. Or another worst case scenario, there's no link at all. It's just coming soon. Who knows where or how? And that's not how readers today, in today's socially media driven internet, that's not how they consume content anyway. Right? They're not, nobody's bookmarking pages. Somebody just the other day said, "Oh my God, Evil Link. I haven't read that strip in years. Ever since my RSS aggregator went up, I don't read any webcomics anymore, hardly." Right? We need to talk about sometime how RSS really thwarted a lot of webcomics reading, but they don't read like they used to. It's not bookmarks. It's not RSS readers. It's not any of that stuff. And so this coming soon type of thing is really wasted effort. I would put much more effort in making those 10 pages killer, making sure that there's a narrative hook somewhere in the first few pages of that 10 pages, and making sure that this is the best 10 pages. And then I would put all 10 pages up in a block so that the first impulse of somebody reading your stuff, they get to that narrative hook and then they're hooked.
Right.
I wouldn't waste time with coming soon. And it was one of the first things I learned in social media in promoting. Never promote something that's not there yet.
Yeah.
Because your best case scenario is people start to get excited and it's not there. And people don't wait for content like they used to on the web. I don't want to know that something's coming next week. I want to have it now. But next week, the way algorithms work, next week, I might not even get your message.
Yeah, that's true. Well, to Alex's original point, and I think I'm realizing that I'm guilty of this. With certain drive things, I didn't draw anything special. By the way, I think that's a dumb idea. Don't draw any posters or any coming soon. Don't draw anything new. But I think if it takes you 30 seconds to generate something in Photoshop based on an existing panel from a comic that's coming next week, I think maybe there's an argument to be made for that. To Alex's point, you could share that on Twitter and Instagram and stuff. And I'm realizing that I'm saying that because I did that with some drive stuff. So I think that that's natural and normal.
So since you did it, now it's okay?
I will be honest. So here was my point, is that if looking back on it, did that gain any additional readers or any additional interest? Probably not. But here's what it did. What I was doing was salving my own excitement for the project. And if I'm honest about it, it didn't do anything to help the project. It was only me going, boy, I want other people to be as excited as I am about next week, you know?
Now, I'll take that and I'll throw it on its end. One thing I do, and I recommend strongly, and it falls under this same thing, is doing previews for your Patreon backers, because now they're locked into your content stream, or at least they should be, and you're working to keep them locked in. And so I will post sketches of work that they're going to see in final art, but I'll put my pencils up, I'll put my sketches up, and say, and group them together. I'll say, here's a few images from some commissions I'm working on. Here's a few panels from an After Dark page that I'm working on. That kind of stuff is future implied content. And we talked about on the show a little while ago. And that actually, Patreon has shown that stuff keeps Patreon pledgers hanging on month after month after month because they've got future implied value coming through. So in that respect, if you want to do that, now that's a completely different deal. Putting sketches up to say this is what's coming soon keeps those pledgers hanging on, and they're already locked into your content feed, so you don't have to worry about the next one missing them. That I would say I would go great guns in doing. But the other one, no, I don't have a lot of use for. Do you agree?
I do. I want to ask Alex a question related to the way you just described that, Brad. So because comics for Patreon, they're locked in, they're ready to go. But what about this, Alex? What if a coming soon for the one thing in comics that does have a time limit, like movies and TV on it? What if for your Kickstarter you do a coming soon?
Oh, absolutely. I do that. I think, yeah, especially for if this is not the question asker's first project, I would say it's perfectly kosher to, make those kind of little promo images and coming soon to hype up, the followers that you do have and sort of get that excitement going with them.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm with Alex on that. I'm not as against the idea of doing some coming soon type promotions for a Kickstarter for something that has a limited time frame. That might be the missing component here.
Yeah, and since you both were in agreement on that point, I want to point out that I see you both agreeing on using question asker rather than questioner. I see you both. You two Midwesterners are teaming up on me and using question asker. I see you. You both are being nice to. I'm on to you. I'm on to you with your question asker. Well, Alex, one question I wanted to ask you, and we should have done this at the top of the show, but how did the working relationship with you and Brad start? Specifically, I'm sort of curious about the coloring not suitable for work comics. How did that get going?
Well, let's see. I started working for Brad in 2015, I think. Yeah, and so I forget when did you start doing the Not Safe for Work? Was it 2015 or 2016?
It might have been 20. Oh man, you know what? I've got to go back and look. I don't know off the top of my head now.
It may have been the first year because there was the month in August where you went down to twice a week.
Yeah.
And that was around the same time you got the Not Safe for Work stuff going. But none of that stuff ever found its way to my Dropbox, inbox for coloring. So I'm looking over there at Brad like, what's he doing over there with colors for that stuff?
I was so embarrassed, and I was trying to color that stuff myself, and I was horrible at it. Yeah, and I'm looking back. Alex, you had to have joined me earlier than 2016 because I started Not Safe for Work in 2015, and you had been with me for a while at that point.
Okay, yeah, so it was the first year.
But I'm sort of curious about the specific conversation of how two Midwesterners navigated around the idea that sex exists. I just want to know how did that...
Go ahead, Alex.
Brad,
give him the true story.
Well, unlike Brad, I'm not an ex-Catholic or anything like that, so I don't have quite as many hangups. But the phone call, it started with like a text, like, so Brad, how you coloring that stuff that you're doing for Patreon? What's going on with that? And he's like, okay, do you have time for phone call?
And Brad immediately blushing on the other end of the phone, that text.
I think what I asked was, when do you think we're going to go back to 5 days a week?
Yeah,
because it had just been twice a week for about a month, and I'm like, hey, I'm making less money now.
Yeah, because you weren't overt about it, but meanwhile, because you never said what's going on with After Dark, but I do remember you talking about schedule, and I had been coloring After Dark on my own and doing it horribly, just failing miserably. And not enjoying it and taking too much time out of my schedule, I realized very quickly I could be doing more work if I wasn't coloring this stuff. But the very idea of asking and I'm sorry, this shows how old-fashioned I am. Asking a woman to color this kind of stuff, I couldn't bring myself to do it. I wanted to do it in the worst way. I couldn't bring myself to do it. And then she opened the door,
right,
so then we had a phone call.
Now 5 minutes in, we finally get the story. How did this phone call go down?
Let me tell you, Dave. Let me tell you. It was the most gentlemanly phone call I think I've ever received.
Dear madam.
There was a lot of that thing that Brad does, like,
Oh, I didn't know. I might have had a script written down in front of me.
Brad, this is like 14-year-old Brad about to call a girl to ask her on a date, just like has all the pre-scripted responses written on a notepad. Oh, Brad.
Yes.
Oh, Brad. Oh, my heart.
And the same the same feeling of the 15-year-old Brad, because I was absolutely certain that I would not only get rejected, but rejected in a horrified way. Like, I can't even believe you're asking me to go to the prom.
So yeah, we did talk about it, and we agreed to like a rate and stuff like that. And so then he started sending me the naked people to color.
The naked people.
And then I get that first comic, and it's just head and shoulders above anything I've ever done. And the Patreon backers went nuts over it. It was glorious. She did a wonderful job and has ever since.
I do wish I could see patron comments on the After Dark stuff. That's unfortunate.
Yeah, we got to get away. Dave and I are going to PatreCon in a few days, and I want to ask about getting like an admin set up so you could have a view at that, like an admin level.
Well, not to jump topics, but last year at the PatreCon that I went to, that was a big topic for a lot of people that have 1, 2, 3, 4 employees. Is like, hey, I need my employees to be able to do shipping, or hey, I need my employees to be able to answer as though they're me, or hey, I need my employees to comment as though they're me. We need an administrative login or something. And so I know that they're working on that. So yeah, we can definitely follow up on how to get Alex the ability to log in without
paying Brad $10 a month.
Right.
That's right.
I have to tell you both, though, I would pay good money to hear that phone conversation with Brad Fumpering. That would be chef's kiss. That would be amazing.
It was precious.
Dave, you know how like your face gets hot because you're blushing so hard and you can feel the heat radiating off of it. I'm pacing back and forth in my studio as I'm talking and stuttering up a storm because, like I said, I'm just certain that I'm going to be offensive. It was horrible.
And on the other end, Alex is going, "Oh, this poor man with Tourette's. What? He just."
It's okay, Brad. It's okay.
Yeah, and it was, it's, you can tell. Listen, there's very few people that I trust as much as I trust Alex Heberling because she could very easily she could say, "Oh my God, you're a horrible person," and I would hear that and just crumble. So she holds my ego in her hand every week in and week out.
I've never had this much power before.
You can crush him. I'm like that somebody on Street Fighter 2. Crush him.
Oh my goodness, yes.
Finish him.
Oh yeah, not Street Fighter 2. What game am I thinking of? What was that old game in the 90s?
Mortal Kombat.
There you go. Mortal Kombat. Yeah. You can yank Brad's spine out. There you go.
Well, that sounds like a fantastic time for me to say this. You've been listening to Comic Lab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
Your hosts have been the ever-delightful Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the cartoonist of Evil Inc. at evil-comic.com.
And Dave Kellett, co-director of Stripped and cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com, along with our special guest, cartoonist extraordinaire and Evil Inc. colorist Alex Heberling. You can check out Alex's work at alexheberling.com. Be sure to read the hues. It is fantastic.
And, of course, the Comic Lab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net. And this episode was edited by Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions at www.woodsong.media.
Comic Lab is made possible by your support on patreon.com/Comic Lab, so we'll go ahead and say that twice. Patreon.com/Comic Lab.
So then he started sending me the naked people to color.
The naked people.